What's been going on in the news this week? Anything for us to catch up on by way of a soft intro?
Whiteley is opening a McDonald's.
Oh, I was going to go.
That is big news.
Yeah.
Whiteley's opening one, and the is it the Millbrook one? The Millbrook one is closed because of a pest infestation.
I was going to say there's only one McDonald's I probably would not eat from. Actually, it's the KFC in Millbrook, but that's because it gave Sim a bad tummy once, and I think...
I reckon I had lunch from either that McDonald's or that KFC at least 3 times a week for about a year when I worked in the NHS.
Why you are the way you are.
Days of Totten, when we did like evening prayer meetings and we would load up a minibus full of equipment, there was a guaranteed Millbrook KFC or Matthew's.
Yeah.
To the point where I crashed the church minibus. This is recording into a bollard in that car park.
Did you really?
No, crash is a strong word. Just nudged.
Yeah.
A little tap.
I'm going to get in trouble.
Yeah. Well, what a way to start.
It's good.
Talking of things that get blotted out the story.
It's good to confess your sins amongst brothers and sisters.
Hey, when the story of your life is written down at the end of your days, Chris, that will not be a detail that's included.
Yeah.
Thanks to the grace of God.
Not in the 1 Chronicles version.
For David, it was Bathsheba. For you, it was your trip in the minibus to McDonald's. It's been rewritten.
You've had a car crash as well, haven't you, Tom?
Oh,
yeah, we'll leave that one out. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, but
I
have a daughter that reminds me about it like semi-regularly as well, who got absolutely fixated on it at the time.
Wow.
Also, on my way to collect the church mini, it was something about that minibus.
Yeah.
It's under a curse.
I've never gone near the minibus.
Yeah, it's probably
A wise move.
Yeah. Can't really even drive my own car, let alone minibus.
Well, in the context of these sad stories, thought we might talk about the topic of disappointment this week. Where do we get that from 1 Chronicles?
Well, I think you look at the kind of context of where it is in the story, and that kind of it's looking back at the moments we've just been looking at in Samuel and Kings, but with a load of retrospect and a load of hindsight after this massive period of exile, isn't it? And whereas everything else was quite fresh, like as we were coming out of Samuel and Kings, it's like the story's being told as these things are unfolding and as this stuff's happening, whereas you've got this like period of reflection that's happened in between the events and the moment where Ezra's writing Chronicles. And it would be, if we were writing the story, probably because we're slightly more pessimistic than Ezra was, but we would want to include all the details and all the heartache and things like that, but actually Chronicles kind of skims over those things and as part of the story being rewritten, but it doesn't mean that our disappointment magically goes away, and that I didn't explain that very well.
No, I think you can do that though. Like I don't know, you look, say you've been on holiday, and obviously there's like there might have been some really good times in the holiday, but also it might have rained, and then I don't know, you might have argued and whatever. There'd be a whole mix of things
like
with
you
a
guys
holiday.
Had a great holiday.
Yeah. Do we need to check in with Simeon?
Yeah. He's still actually abroad.
Yeah. He didn't return.
I left him there.
No, but then you come back, or like a few years later, and you're like, it could even just be the country. You look back on where you went, and you're like, oh yeah, it's gorgeous. Like, we had such a good holiday there. Or even like school, you look back on school, and you can go, oh, I love school, but actually the day to day. Like you could have had some really
some
moments of like, but it's because like say hindsight, you can look back on a situation and feel differently about it, or even choose to view differently about it. And
some of that is so how we're wired as humans, that there is a huge breadth of human emotion in the way that God has made us. So like in a couple of weeks we'll come on to look at the Psalms. You see examples of moments of celebration, moments of like pain, anguish, suffering, lament, like everything in between. We are like wired in a way that on the day to day and when we're in the midst of something, we experience it emotionally, and that affects us, and that all of us are different in that, and we process our emotions differently, but actually circumstances can really affect us, whereas actually in time, when you, exactly as you're saying, when you reflect back, we're not so caught up in I was so up then down, but you can see a longer trajectory. And in this case, you see a longer trajectory just of the goodness and the faithfulness of God, in spite of how on the day-to-day or the immediate stuff was so up and down all over the place. Actually, God is seems that God is so constant, and that's such a reassurance for us when we can be all over the place, can't we?
Yeah, and that I loved what Alice shared in Totten on Sunday of that, and I resent that Stacey Solomon is getting as much airtime as she is, but the kind of the example of the TV programme of Sort Your Life Out, and you look at the stories behind the people on that programme where it's because of circumstances in life or tough situations or things that have happened, gradually the junk has built up in the home and it's gotten more and more chaotic, and it takes a moment like laying the entire contents of your house out in a warehouse and realising how much junk you've got, or what you're holding on to and why you're holding on to that. And I think God in his grace gives us those moments in our lives, doesn't he, where he kind of, as he does in Chronicles for the people of God, pulls us back from the day-to-day carnage of things and allows some time to pass, and then says, okay, well, let's talk about that moment and what was going on there. Like I think for me, in my sort of testimony growing up, like not in church, my parents' divorce was a huge thing in my childhood and has affected me in many different ways throughout my life and still does to this day. But there's moments where God will step me back at key times, and whether it be about my nanny's marriage or about how I'm parenting my kids or how I relate to people and trusting things, all sorts of different moments, and God will step back and say, okay, do you see what I was doing in and through you when we did this and when we dealt with this issue that's come out of that? And it would be easy to just live forever in the carnage and the kind of heartbreak of that moment, but God's kind, isn't he? And so gradually he peels back the layers of, okay, this is the story of my life, but actually here's these moments where I'm going to show you that I was being really faithful in that moment, and this is how I was working things together for your good, and this is what I was doing in the background of those things. And I wouldn't, the Bible wouldn't be what it is to, the story of God's people, the church wouldn't be what it is today without those horrible moments and the down moments. But ultimately, like you say, almost like when you come back from the holiday and you only remember the good bits, like the thread we see throughout is God's faithfulness, isn't it? And him working out his plans and purposes in the midst of our mess and in the difficulty. It's so important to hold on to.
And I think like David, you look at that, David had a new story written, or it was the bad bits taken out, and but that wouldn't have just been like his moments of disappointment or lack of trust. It was like horrendous sin and stuff. But I wonder whether is disappointment something that we are not as quick to deal with, because maybe it's a lot more like if there's an obvious sin, you can address that and even people will point it out in you. But I was just thinking about disappointment, and I almost could like describe it as a really subtle, slow disease that maybe just creeps in. It may be that there's a situation that happens and you can say, oh, I'm just a bit disappointed, but I'm all right, But actually that disappointment, what does it actually do to you? Does it just kill slowly your faith that you have? And especially when it's over a long period of time, if you're disappointed, if you keep saying, I want to see healings, or I want to see my friend come to know Jesus, or I don't know, and then it's really hard to shake off that disappointment.
And I think lots of that kind of emotion potentially, and this sounds quite cold, don't hear it as that, but it often comes from the root cause of that being maybe a slightly misunderstood worldview in which we can think that our ideas of how things should go are the perfect way, and we know best. And sometimes that can just come out of not fully appreciating, understanding God's sovereignty, God's control that he has over everything, and fully trusting in that means me being willing to die to myself, which includes to die to the way of my ideals of how I would like things to go. And sometimes, and that doesn't take away from the pain of disappointment. It can be very real, and but actually it can be a real comfort in those moments to come back to the truth, to root yourself in the fact of God's in control, God's sovereign, he hears our prayers, because actually the knock-on effect from disappointment can quite easily be that your faith goes, doesn't it? You can give up in prayer, whereas actually we're called to, in spite of disappointment, to persevere in prayer and keep asking of God, aren't we? And that's a real challenge and tension, isn't it? I don't know whether I've had instances in the past where actually faced with disappointment, it can be really tough to keep going, to keep praying.
I mean, even living with some stuff now of when you're praying for non-Christian
Yeah.
friends and family. Like I mentioned, my dad, like, been praying for him for 20. Well, not I haven't been praying, they've been separated for 20 years. I've been praying for him for 12. Like, and that sense of, like, there's been moments where he's come really close, and there's been moments where he's just seemed really distant to God, and that concentrating on the unchanging, faithful nature of God, not on the changing nature of where my dad's at on his journey, and others as well who you're praying for. And I think exactly it should, like, it's got to be rooted in the character of God, not on my expectations or on my, like. So when he is there's been a season recently where he's closer, and like, I've got to make sure that my hope is not in my ability to have a really good conversation with him, or to articulate something, or to be brave and pray at the right moment, although obedience is important. My focus and my hope is in God's character and in his faithfulness to his promise. Big picture. So
I think there's, like, I think I'm struggling with the tension of, like, we're living in the kingdom of now and not yet. And, like, I remember just the whole, like, in Hedge End, we're hearing that people are getting saved most Sunday mornings in the Welcome area, or they're just, like, waking up and going, I'm going to come to church. And I think when you're in the Totton location and you're 4 years on, and relationally we're in such a strong place, but I'm like living with this thing of, I just want one, like, I just want one healing on a Sunday morning, or I just want one salvation. And I remember I just was talking about this with Sim, and I said I'd rather be considered a mug for being too positive or optimistic or living in the now, than kind of settle for let's just and so I think I'm kind of going, actually it is all in God's control, but I'm believing that this is for now, and it's up to him if it's not yet, and so I want to keep
really good.
going with that.
Really, I'm probably picking up on that as well, like, just you've inspired me to think around that. And when we went to Tanzania recently, we were preaching in one of the local churches, and we were just preaching simple messages on the love of Jesus to these people, and there were some non-Christians in the room, and I felt stirred to just give the kind of call to response at the end of the 3 talks that we'd done, and people respond, like 4 people responded to the gospel. And I think I then was reflecting on it when we got back to the hotel room, and I said I was a little bit overwhelmed, and I just went, I hadn't realised quite how disappointed I'd gotten with the lack of gospel fruit in Totton, and, like, even just kind of it was just a reminder from God of, like, oh no, I can do it, like, and it's not that, but it becomes so easy, like you said, to get into the, I mean, I love preaching in Totton, I love what God is doing amongst us on a Sunday, but when you put yourself out there each, most weeks, and say, like, I'm going to pray a prayer for people who don't yet know Jesus, and no hands go up, no one comes forward afterwards to say, I just prayed that prayer, let's talk to me about baptism, like, when that doesn't happen, despite maybe trying to be optimistic and all that sort of stuff, you don't realise necessarily sometimes how discouraged you're becoming. And I think I had to do a good bit of business with God in Tanzania, of, like, right, same God who was there saving people in Arusha is there in Totton on a Sunday morning when we're gathering, really to save people who come along there, and same God is doing it in Hedge End. And that was a timely sort of challenge on that whole thing of disappointment for me as well.
I had a different example of processing disappointment, which makes me look silly, so it's okay to say, but
Is this your garden?
No.
Okay, all right.
My garden's great. It was leading worship at an event last year at New Day, and it was not last year, the year before, so it's the first time that we'd done that as a team. And if you're looking at it in terms of an event, that's kind of the largest thing I've ever been privileged to go and do. And so, I don't think you're human if you're not feeling a little bit of, this feels like a big deal. I don't know. I hope this doesn't go badly. So, lots and lots of people that you're leading worship for. And I had just one particular session, which my team are very good in humbling me by regularly reminding me, I had an absolute shocker from a musical point of view, I don't know whether I was just, like, sleep deprived, and it was as the week was going on. It was just awful in terms of, if you're looking at it from a performance mentality. And so I was saying things down the wrong microphones. I was meant to be talking to the band. I'm talking to 8,000 teenagers, telling them to do something. I'm pressing the wrong pedals, just all over the shop. And I remember coming up and I grabbed a mate to talk to about this, because I was really frustrated with myself that I felt so disappointed with my own performance.
Yeah.
And I spend like my whole working life journeying with people through the fact that worship isn't a performance. It's not about getting up and putting something on, and actually it's not about how it goes, and God gets the glory whether it goes well, whether it goes badly. And actually processing my own disappointment that I needed to hear that for myself. Like I've been saying that to others, but actually that was a big deal in that moment, to be humbled. I think one of the songs, the friend who I was speaking to just reminded, one of the songs we had sung in that terrible set was had like the lines in it, God, you're the only one who really matters, and it all comes back to you.
Yeah, okay.
It's almost like, so in singing that, you've almost been leading others in that, but thinking, well, it's not God's the only one that really matters, because I also need to do a good job here. And so I think processing disappointment is for everyone, and we all encounter moments in life where it could even sneak up on us. We didn't even think that we cared so much about that thing, but actually I feel gutted. Why is that? And often just the root cause is a bit of pride in us, isn't it?
Yeah. It's interesting that came out in all of those stories that we just shared, of like the kind of shadow side of disappointment is pride. And like actually it's not often it's an expectation we're putting on ourselves to play the role that God really should be playing, either for people we're leading or in our own lives. And we can talk about disappointment in that kind of sort of therapeutic, we just got to talk it through in prison, but actually it reveals something else of our depravity and our kind of constant, what the thing that goes through all this kind of period of history in the Bible is people making idols, and obviously they do it in a way of like, it's obvious, and it's golden cows and it's false gods and big statues and things like that, whereas we do it probably way more subtly on an everyday level, don't we, either of ourselves or of people or things. Well, edit that out. And that.
Do you think disappointment hurts more when it's linked to the feeling of personal failure? So like you could be disappointed in an outcome. Can't think of an example, but it's more like, because you're saying you felt disappointed in yourself, and so maybe that has a whole thing of I'm a failure, rather than actually I was praying for something and it didn't happen, but ultimately that's on God, that's not on me. Is it is it easier to...
And sometimes we can be so closely zoned in on it that you almost need that other person, and we get to do church and community, don't we? You almost need someone outside being able to speak encouragement in. So like using the example of, and I don't say it as a token thing, but using the example of when you guys are focused on Tottenham praying for people, you almost need those outside saying, but look at what God is doing amongst you, and look at the foundations you're laying, and imagine the fruit that you're going to bear in years to come because of what's being done now. And it almost needs we can live with but I wanted more, but actually sometimes others are able to point out actually the encouragement that we need.